Hello there, and welcome. I am very glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe the day has been full. Maybe your thoughts are still moving in small, unhurried circles, turning over questions that do not quite have answers yet. The kind of quiet hypothetical that sits somewhere behind the eyes before sleep arrives. Or maybe you are here because Hellenist still pulls at something in you. Not the sharp challenge of it, not the maps, not the routes you know by reflex now, but the sadness underneath it, the slow and patient grief that lives in the kingdom's reign and resting places and sealed doors. The kind of sadness that is heavy enough to settle into, and gentle enough, spoken softly enough, to let you rest inside it. So tonight, you can settle in. Let your shoulders loosen, let your breathing slow, let the room around you grow quieter at its edges, the sounds of the day receding as though they were always meant to be distant by this hour. There is no fight waiting here tonight, no seal to break, no archive to reach, no deepness passage to navigate in the dark. Tonight is not for rushing. Tonight is only for a question, asked slowly, turned gently in the quiet. A question that reaches into the deepest part of what Hallowist was built to hold, and what Hallowist required of the three beings who loved it best, or who were willing to make the arrangement that preserved it longest. Tonight, we are going to ask what Hallowist would have looked like if the three dreamers had never gone to sleep. Not whether it would have been better, not whether it would have been worse. Those words are too simple for the kingdom below the earth, where nearly every act of goodness carried a cost, and every sacrifice was also, in some way, a wound. We are going to move through the question the way you move through the tunnels beneath the kingdom, slowly, carefully, letting each room tell its own story before passing into the next. We will stay close to what the world confirms, and when we step into the hypothetical, we will walk carefully, noting every place where the ground beneath the guess could give way. The dreamers are three. Their names are Monoman the Teacher, Lurian the Watcher, and Hurrah the Beast. And what they agreed to, what they gave up and what they preserved and what they made possible by closing their eyes, is one of the most consequential acts in the history of a kingdom that is full of consequential acts. Without them, everything changes. With them, almost everything still fails, only more slowly, only more quietly, only with enough time for a small silent night to find its way to the wound at the centre of the world. But that is the story as it happened. Tonight we follow the story as it might not have. Before we begin, if this quiet wandering helps you rest, you can leave a like so another tired traveller might find it too. And if you feel like commenting, tell me where you are listening from tonight. It is a comforting thought. Many small rooms, many low lights, many slow breaths, all resting for a while above the same old sealed kingdom below the earth. Now, breathe in. And breathe out. The Black Egg Temple is sealed. The masks are on the door. The dreamers are sleeping. Let us begin by understanding what that sleep was and why it mattered more than almost anything else in Hallowist. The Black Egg Temple sits in the Forgotten Crossroads. It is one of the first places the knight encounters, and for most of the early journey it is simply there, sealed, significant, heavy with meaning that has not yet been explained. The door is carved with 3 masks. The air around it feels different from the rest of the crossroads, heavier, more deliberate, pressed with a kind of importance that does not come from architecture alone, but from something older and more intimate. Pilgrims gather near it, husks drift around it. Even in a kingdom this ruined, the temple has a gravity that has survived the collapse of everything else. The masks on the door are not decoration, they are seals. Each mask corresponds to one of the three dreamers, each one a living lock formed by a sleeping mind in a distant part of the kingdom. The temple cannot be opened while those minds dream. The hollow night, sealed inside, holds the radiance within its body, and the three sleeping minds hold the door shut around that terrible arrangement. Take away any one of those minds and the seal weakens. Take away all three and the door opens. The kingdom of Hallownest had, in the dreamers, its three most essential points of protection, and each one of those protection points was a person who had chosen, or agreed or bargained to give up waking life forever. That is the foundation of everything the question tonight touches. The dreamers were not enchanted against their will and locked into sleep by some royal command. The arrangement was more complicated than that, and more human, if that word can reach into the underground kingdom at all. Monoman made a calculation, Lurien made a devotion, Hurrah made a bargain. 3 different natures, 3 different reasons, 3 different kinds of love and wisdom and self-interest and loss, all converging on the same act of lying down and closing their eyes so that the world above and below could have a little more time. What the Pale King's sealing plan required was not only a vessel to contain the radiance, it required a lock. The hollow night was the vessel, chosen from among the countless shells that had fallen into the abyss, the children of void and royal union who were tested and discarded and tested again until one was selected. The vessel held the dream light inside its body. The dreamers held the prison shut around the vessel. Without that second layer, the container might exist, but it could not be secured. A vessel in an unsecured temple would be a vessel anyone could reach, including the Radiance herself, pressing outward through the bond she had forced into minds across the kingdom. The seals were accessed through dream. The Pale King's plan was built on the understanding that the Radiance's power moved through dreaming, through the membrane between sleeping and waking, where the forgotten light could slip back into minds that had once worshipped it. The dreamers entered a permanent version of that membrane. Their essences were preserved in an eternal dreaming state, their sleeping forms resting in physical places across the kingdom, while their dreaming selves held the door. To break a seal, the knight would need the dream nail, a tool that could enter the dreaming world and reach the sleeping mind within it. Without the dream nail, the seals could not be broken. Without the dreamers, the seals could not exist. That is the architecture of the system. Now we need to understand what it cost the 3 who held it up. Let the temple sit in silence for a moment, the 3 masks looking outward. Something sealed behind them. Something that once filled the sky of the old world with light pressing through dream, contained now, barely, behind a door held shut by 3 sleeping minds in 3 distant rooms. The enormity of what that required is easier to understand if we begin where knowledge rested. Monoman the teacher was the keeper of the teacher's archives, a place of preserved water and glass tucked into Fog Canyon, accessible by crossing the canyon's floating menace and the strange translucent creatures that drift there like thoughts too slow to become speech. The archives were not built like the grand civic structures of the City of Tears. They were intimate in a different way, a place of research, of stored understanding, of the kind of knowledge that lives in water and glass, rather than in stone and proclamation. Monoman belonged to a tradition of preservation. She believed the world could be understood, that its creatures and histories and forces deserved to be observed, recorded, and passed on. She was the teacher. That title is not a ceremonial one in Hallownest. It is a description of her deepest nature. She believed that knowledge given was knowledge multiplied, that the value of understanding grew when it left the single mind and became shared. The archives were the expression of that belief in architectural form. Books and specimens and records and light preserved in water, accessible to those who could reach through the fog and the acid and the charged creatures that patrolled the canyon's paths. By the time the Pale King's plan took shape, the infection was already a pressure felt across the kingdom. It moved through dreaming. It entered minds. It turned citizens into husks and labourers into compulsions and song into silence. Monoman understood what it was and where it came from, because understanding things was what she did. And a teacher who cannot understand the nature of the plague that threatens her students and her archives and her world has already failed at what matters most. She agreed to become a dreamer. She agreed to press her essence into a permanent dream state, to let her sleeping form hold one of the three seals, to give up the waking life of a teacher who walks among students and updates her records and watches the canyon light shift through the water. That was no small thing. For a being whose identity was built around active knowledge, around the living exchange between mind and world, choosing permanent sleep was a profound surrender. The archives would remain, but the teacher inside them would no longer be awake to tend them. But Monoman did something before she slept that no other dreamer did in the same way. She sent Quirrell away. Quirrell is a wanderer who appears at several points along the night's journey, curious and gentle and observant, with the manner of someone who loves the world more than the world has given him reason to. He carries Monoman's mask on his head, though for much of his time in the kingdom he does not fully understand why that mask is there, or what it once meant to the being who wore it. Monoman sent him away with her mask as an additional layer of protection, a secondary measure around herself before she closed her eyes. She trusted the mask to someone who would carry it without fully knowing its weight, and that trust was itself a form of teaching. She could not be certain Quirrell would return when needed. She could not be certain the seal would ever be broken in the right way at the right time. But she preserved the possibility. What makes Quirrell's role in all of this so quietly affecting is precisely that he does not know it. He wanders Hallownest with the warmth and curiosity of someone who simply finds the world interesting, who genuinely enjoys meeting another traveller in the dark, who remarks on the beauty of the Crystal Peak and the melancholy of the City of Tears without the weight of purpose pressing down on any of it. He appears in Dirtmouth at the start, near the well, looking out at a town that barely exists anymore, with the kind of interested observation that belongs to someone who has arrived somewhere unusual and finds that interesting rather than discouraging. He appears in the Crystal Peak studying the specimens that the miners once extracted, marvelling at the deep light of the crystals. He appears by the memorial fountain in the City of Tears, quiet and thoughtful beside the record of those who gave something to the kingdom. He appears outside the teacher's archives in Fog Canyon, and something in him that has no name pulls him toward a door he barely remembers but is not surprised to find. That pull is what Monoman gave him instead of a mission. She erased the memory of the mask's significance but left the orientation toward it, the deep and wordless sense that this direction matters, that this door has something to do with who he is and what he was meant to carry. He found his way back without knowing why finding his way back was the right thing to do. And when he helps the knight defeat Umu, the strange and drifting creature that guards the inner archive, he participates in completing what Monomon designed. He removes the mask afterward, and the extra protection falls, and the knight can reach Monomon's dreaming self and break the seal. The teacher and the one she trusted are reunited only in the moment of the seal's ending. That is a reunion shaped like a farewell, and it is one of the quietest heartbreaks in a kingdom that rarely announces its grief. After that, Quirrell finds his way to the Blue Lake, the still water at the top of the world, and he sits there on the shore with something in his face that looks like peace. Whether what waits for him at the Blue Lake is rest or return, or simply the satisfaction of having done what he was shaped to do without ever quite knowing its full dimensions, the world does not say directly. But the image stays. Now hold that image and carry it into the hypothetical. What if Monoman had never agreed to sleep? The archives would remain. The teacher would remain awake inside them, tending the records, observing the creatures of Fog Canyon, working at the edge of understanding that the plague spreading through the kingdom was something that could be studied, perhaps even countered. There is a version of Hallownest in which the teacher's mind is still fully engaged with the crisis, cataloguing the infection spread, documenting which regions were most affected and in what sequence, building knowledge of the Radiance's dreamlight that no one else in the kingdom possessed in the same way. But knowledge without a container for the thing that knowledge reveals is not the same as salvation. Monoman awake would be brilliant, and perhaps even useful in ways the sealed Monoman was not. But Monomon awake would be one mind without the seal that only her dreaming self could provide. The Black Egg Temple would have only 2 masks instead of 3, and 2 locks on a door designed for 3 is not the same as 3 locks. The Pale King's plan depended on the precision of 3. That number was not arbitrary. There is also the question of Quirrell. If Monoman never slept, Quirrell never receives the mask. He never carries a purpose he does not understand back toward the kingdom. The pull that brings him to Fog Canyon, to the archives, to the moment where he helps the knight complete the circuit, that pull would not exist. Quirrell might still have wandered. He was always curious, but he would have been a wanderer without the hidden thread pulling him toward a specific door, a specific moment, a specific kind of purpose that waited inside him like a letter he had not yet opened. And there would be no quiet ending at the Blue Lake for someone who had unknowingly completed the task of a lifetime. There would only be another wanderer in a ruined kingdom, curious and careful, with no particular thread connecting his wandering to anything that mattered. That is what Monoman's agreement to sleep gave the world, a sealed archive that would hold its shape, a mask entrusted to a wanderer who would carry purpose without knowing it, and 1/3 of the lock that held something vast and terrible closed inside a stone temple in the forgotten crossroads. The teacher's awake mind might have produced more knowledge. The teacher's sleeping mind helped produce, for a time, the only arrangement that slowed the light from consuming everything. Let the fog canyon breathe softly. Let the water in the archive settle. Let the charged creatures drift through the damp canyon air without urgency. Monoman made her choice in water and glass and silence, and the archives kept her shape, if not her waking. Lurien the Watcher was different from Monomon in almost every way that matters for understanding what he chose. Where Monomon was a keeper of knowledge, Lurien was a keeper of attention. Where the archives belonged to study and preservation and the active exchange of understanding, the Watcher's spire in the City of Tears belonged to observation. Lurien watched. That was his nature and his title and his purpose in the kingdom. From the high tower above the rain-filled capital, he turned his attention to the city below, to the kingdom beyond it, to the patterns and movements and changes that only become visible when you hold still long enough to see them. The City of Tears is one of the most melancholy places in all of Hallownest, and it is melancholy in a specific way that belongs to cities rather than to wilderness or archive. It was built for crowds, for commerce, for civic order, and the kind of daily human movement that fills public space with noise and warmth. Its towers and elevators and windows and locked districts are all the architecture of a living society. A rain-filled capital, a city that wept not from grief but from the blue lake above it, the water of that hidden lake draining through stone and sealing into the streets below. The rain is built into the city in the most literal way. It is geological, architectural, inevitable, and still utterly mournful. What made the City of Tears extraordinary in its living days was the density of it, the way an underground city had been made to feel like a surface city, with the commerce of a market and the ambition of a capital, and the particular chaos of a place where many different kinds of bugs lived in close proximity with all of their different needs and schedules and customs. The pleasure house offered its relief to those who could afford it. The Soul Sanctum pursued its research into the nature of soul and the energy within living things, work that was ambitious before it became something darker. The merchants took their positions, and the guards walked their routes, and the Stagway connected the city to the rest of the kingdom so that travellers could arrive and depart with a regularity that the kingdom depended on. Lurien watched over all of this from above. He occupied the highest point in the city, a position that was both honour and responsibility, the kind of role that only makes sense if the one holding it genuinely loves what they are watching. You do not go to a high tower to observe something you find tedious. Lurien watched because the city mattered to him in a way that was perhaps less about civic duty and more about something quieter and deeper, the kind of attachment that makes a place feel like a person, makes a city's rain feel like company, makes watching a skyline feel like enough. He chose to become a dreamer. That word chose is important here and worth sitting with for a moment. Among the three dreamers, Lurien's choice appears to be the most straightforwardly voluntary. Monoman made a calculation. Hurrah made a bargain. Lurien made a devotion. He decided that holding the seal mattered more than remaining awake to watch the city he had spent his life observing. That is a remarkable thing, not a sacrifice forced on him by circumstance or negotiated into existence by mutual need. A decision made clearly that the city was worth more than his own continued presence in it. The Watcher's spire in the City of Tears still holds his sleeping form. The tower stands high above the rain, and around his sleeping body the Watcher Knights keep their empty vigil. The Watcher Knights are not ordinary guards in the same sense as the husk sentries that patrol the city streets. They are armors animated by swarms of infection, the very force that the Dreamer seals are meant to contain. The defense around the sleeping Lurien is built from the enemy he is sleeping to hold back. That is one of Hallownest's characteristic cruelties. The guards have become the danger, and the Watcher cannot see it, because the Watcher is not awake to watch. This detail matters for the hypothetical. If Lurien had never slept, the Watcher Knights would not have become what they are. The tower would still have guards, but guards connected to a living mind that could direct them. Lurien awake means a tower with direction. Lurien asleep means a tower with armor moved by the very plague he gave up waking life to resist. What would Lurien have done if he had remained awake? He would have watched the city fall. That is the truth that the hypothetical cannot soften. The Watcher's title is not the Protector or the Defender, it is the Watcher. Lurien's gift was attention, not power. He could see what was happening to the city, to the kingdom, with a clarity that many others lacked. But watching does not stop the infection from entering the dreams of citizens and hollowing them out into husks. Watching does not seal the black egg or contain the radiance. Watching tells you, with absolute precision, exactly how the thing you love is dying, and the detail of that knowledge is sometimes its own kind of grief. Lurien awake would have watched the City of Tears become what it became, only without the hope that a sealed vessel in a sealed temple was buying time. He would have watched the sentries become shells. He would have watched the soul sanctum hollow itself out with ambition, and then with something darker than ambition. The soul masters pursuing their experiments past the point of care for anything outside their obsession, and then past the point of self-awareness about the obsession itself, until the research continued in the empty way that husks continue doing what they were doing when the infection reached them. He would have watched the wealthy districts and the poor districts, and the pleasure house, and the memorial fountain, and every window full of rain become a kingdom remembering its own death with perfect architectural fidelity. And he would have remained awake to see all of it, with the precision of someone who had trained his attention to notice everything. There is something terrible about that, more terrible perhaps than sleep, because the seal that Lurien's sleep provided was not only practical, it was a form of hope. The Watcher's sleeping mind held a door shut on the belief that the damage was temporary, that the seal would hold long enough for something to change, that the kingdom had purchased with his wakefulness enough time to matter. Without that, without Lurien's seal, the Black Egg Temple would still have 2 remaining masks from Monomon and Hira if they had agreed. But 2 masks cannot hold what 3 held. The door would be weaker, the containment would be more fragile. And Lurien, awake in his high tower, would watch the city die knowing that his one act of attention towards something larger than himself, the act of sleeping for the kingdom's benefit, was the act he declined. Let the rain fall through the City of Tears. Let it fall through windows without glass, and along towers without inhabitants, and into streets without travellers. Let Lurian's tower stand above it, high and still. His vigil was not nothing even in sleep. His vigil held 1/3 of the only lock that mattered. Now let us move to the third dreamer, and to the part of this question that changes the most. Hurrah the Beast was the Queen of Deepness. That is the first and most important thing to understand about her, because Deepness is nothing like the City of Tears or Fog Canyon or the Forgotten Crossroads. It does not belong to the Pale King's civic architecture or his promise of orderly roads and lit passages. Deepness is older, darker, more tangled, a place where the walls seem to breathe and the floor cannot always be trusted, and the creatures that live there developed their own ways of existing, their own laws, their own language of darkness and thread and predatory patience that did not come from royal benevolence. Hurrah ruled a kingdom within Hallownest, a separate power with its own identity, its own hierarchy, its own way of surviving the underground world that the Pale King's light never fully reached. Deepness is frightening. That has to be said honestly, because it is true, and pretending it is not true would make it easier to sentimentalize Hera and her domain in a way that would miss the actual weight of her story. The beasts of Deepness were not gentle neighbours to the rest of the kingdom. They were predators, most of them, or at least they moved with the kind of directional certainty that belongs to creatures who developed in a world without the Pale King's civic light and orderly roads. A world where the rules were older and more immediate and more honestly stated in terms of survival. The passages of Deepness twist without a cartographer's logic. The threads that run through the tunnels are both structural and territorial. The weaving of creatures who used silk as a language of ownership and navigation in the dark. There is beauty in it, seen from far enough back or understood from deep enough within, but it is a beauty that requires you to belong to Deepness to appreciate it without fear, and most of the kingdom never belonged there. The failed tramway tells its own story without needing words. Something reached into Deepness once, an attempt to extend the Pale King's infrastructure into that dark region, to connect the Spider Kingdom to the rest of Hallownest through the kind of engineering the Royal Order was famous for elsewhere. That attempt failed. The tram sits broken and still. The rails lead nowhere useful. Whatever came to build that connection was not welcomed, or not welcomed enough, or found that Deepness resisted the kind of easy integration that other regions of the kingdom eventually accepted. The relationship between Hera's domain and the rest of the kingdom was never a comfortable one. It was proximity without intimacy, coexistence without trust. And yet Hera agreed to become a dreamer. She agreed to become one of the 3 seals on the Black Egg Temple. But her agreement was not the same kind of devotion or calculation that moved Monoman and Lurian. Hurrah made a bargain. She named a price, and the price was a child. The Pale King was the father of the vessels in the abyss, children born of his union with the White Lady, Maid of Void, crafted for the purpose of containing power too vast for any ordinary life to hold. He and the White Lady together made possible the vessel plan, and the vessels themselves were the result of that royal union expressed through an ancient and terrible process in the dark below the kingdom. That much is established by the world Hollow Knight shows clearly. Hera's bargain took that same capacity, that same royal origin, and named it as a condition. She would hold the seal, she would sleep forever in Deepness dark. but she would do it only if the Pale King gave her a child of her own, born from the same royal origin that made the vessels possible. That child was Hornet. Hornet is called the gendered child. She is not a vessel in the same sense as the children in the abyss. She is not hollow. She has a voice and a will and a face and a purpose she has taken into herself so completely that the difference between choosing and being made almost disappears. She is the daughter of Hera and the Pale King, born from the bargain that turned Deepnest's queen into one of Halonest's 3 most important sleeping minds. She carries Deepnest and the capital in the same body, tied to both and fully belonging to neither, moving through the ruined kingdom with a fierce and lonely autonomy that is inseparable from the terms of her own existence. She guards thresholds. She appears at the entry to Greenpath with a needle and a test, and a particular kind of attention that says you may proceed if you can prove you deserve to. She appears again when the night has grown, testing again, measuring against a higher bar. She is present in the Black Egg in certain endings, pulled toward the centre of the story by a thread she did not choose but has accepted. She moves through the ruins with the competence of someone who has spent a long time alone in a world that does not have clear rules about what she is or where she belongs, and who has decided that the absence of those rules is not a reason to stop moving. This is where the hypothetical about the dreamer's sleep becomes something almost unbearably significant. If Hera had never agreed to become a dreamer, the bargain would never have been struck. The bargain would never have been struck means Hornet would never have existed. There would be no gendered child, no guardian of thresholds, no needle flashing in Greenpath, no second fight in Kingdom's Edge, no figure moving through the ruins with a particular combination of competence and loneliness that makes Hornet feel like one of the most fully realised presences in a world full of presences. Take Hera's agreement to sleep away, and Hornet disappears from the story entirely. That is not a small change. It is a change that reaches into every part of the kingdom's last days, because Hornet is not merely a character who appears and fights and departs. She is a living proof that the bargain was real, that Deepnest's queen gave something of herself to the plan, that the seal she holds is connected to a living consequence still moving through the world. Hornet is the cost, and the gift of Hera's sleep made flesh. Without the sleep, there is no gift. Think about what that means for the world that the night descends into. Every place where Hornet appears, every threshold she guards, every test she sets before the night, every moment of quiet acknowledgement between two beings in a ruined kingdom doing their best with what they have been given. All of that disappears from the story entirely. The knight's path is not shaped by her presence. The specific quality of being watched and tested and found acceptable by someone who cares deeply about what is acceptable, that quality is gone from the journey. This is the largest consequence of asking what if Hera never slept. It is not primarily about Deepnest. Deepnest with its queen still present would be a different Deepnest. Certainly, the relationship between the Spider Kingdom and the rest of Halonest would be shaped differently with a living queen governing it, making clear where Deepnest borders stood and what crossing them required. But the larger consequence, the one that reaches furthest, is that a specific person would not exist. one of the most important presences in the whole story of Hallownest's last days would not be there. That is the weight Hera's choice carries, and it is unlike the weight of Monomon's choice or Lurien's choice, because it is not only about what was preserved or what was protected, it is about what was created. Hera's sleep did not only hold a door shut, it made a life possible. Let deepness hold its darkness for a moment. Let the threads and tunnels and breathing walls stay still. Hera sleeps in her own dark kingdom, one of the three minds holding a door shut above her. The child she bargained for moves through a world shaped in part by the mother's agreement to stop moving through it. Now we need to understand what the Hollow Knight was without a proper seal, and why the vessel at the centre of the plan mattered as much as the lock around it. The Hollow Knight was chosen from among the vessels in the abyss. The vessels were the Pale King's children, born of the union between the Pale King, the White Lady, and the ancient void that existed beneath the kingdom's foundation. The void was not created by the Pale King. It predated his order, an old dark substance of immense depth that the king used and shaped and built into his vessel plan without fully understanding what it meant. The vessels were small shapes of that darkness, formed into shells that could walk and carry, and, the Pale King hoped, contain. The vessel plan required something specific, a child that was truly hollow. No mind to think, no will to break, no voice to cry suffering. Those words, taken from the lore the kingdom preserves in its most formal language, describe not merely a capacity, but an aspiration that turned out to be impossible. The vessels could be formed. They could be raised in the White Palace, in whatever way the Pale King managed that raising, but the emptiness that would make one of them a perfect container for the Radiance's power was something that could not be guaranteed by any act of crafting or selection. The Hollow Knight was chosen as the most suitable among many. The Abyss still holds the shells of those who were not selected, the countless siblings who did not rise, the masks that fill the floor of that deepest place like the record of a failure too large to be called by any ordinary name. The chosen vessel was raised to the White Palace, shaped in some way that the hidden memory at the Path of Pain suggests more than it confirms, and eventually placed within the Black Egg Temple to hold the radiance inside its body. The Pale King believed the chosen vessel was hollow enough. He was wrong. A bond formed. Perhaps it formed during the raising in the White Palace, a moment of connection between the one making and the one made, the kind of care that cannot be prevented when two beings exist in proximity for any length of time. Perhaps the bond was older, something about the void's nature that the king did not account for. Perhaps hollowness in the absolute sense the plan required was never truly achievable in a being shaped to walk and breathe and carry meaning. Whatever the origin of the bond, it was enough. The Hollow Knight was not truly hollow. The Radiance found that imperfection and pressed herself through it. The seal at the centre of the plan was flawed before the outer seals were even established. The dreamer's sleep held a door shut around a vessel that could not perfectly do what it was asked to do. The infection that eventually began spreading through the kingdom again was not the result of the dreamer's seals failing. It was the result of the seal at the centre, the Hollow Knight's imperfect hollowness, leaking the Radiance's influence through the cracks in a plan that was never quite sound. This is important for understanding what the dreamer's sleep achieved and what it could not. The dreamer's sleep did not fix the vessel's imperfection. It could not. The flaw was inside the hollow night, inside the relationship between the vessel and the thing it was asked to contain. And no lock, however strong, can prevent a slow leak from within the container it protects. What the dreamer's sleep did was buy time. It held the outer structure in place, while the inner structure quietly gave way. It gave the kingdom decades, perhaps longer, of imperfect containment, during which life continued in whatever forms remained possible, and the corruption spread, but slowly enough that pockets of the world could endure. That time was not nothing. The time that the dreamer's sleep purchased was the time in which Dirtmouth persisted above the well, the time in which the stag stations kept their bells, the time in which the Mantis lords held their village and the hive held its gold, and the resting grounds held its graves and their wandering spirits. The time in which Quirrell could still wander with curiosity, and Cornifer could still hum over incomplete maps, and the last stag could still carry one passenger through the tunnels beneath the ruined roads. Without the dreamer's sleep, there would be no outer lock. The Black Egg Temple, even if the Hollow Knight were placed within it, would stand accessible. Any being or force that found its way to the forgotten crossroads would be able to reach the temple's door. And the radiance, pressing outward through the Hollow Knight's imperfect hollowness, would have more than a slow leak to work with. She would have a door that could be reached, a container that could be breached, a timeline that did not require decades of patient erosion, but could move faster, more directly, with less resistance. The dreamer's sleep was not a cure. It was not even a complete solution. But it was the difference between an infection that moved through the kingdom over time, while a small chance assembled itself, and an infection that had no barrier at all between its source and the rest of what remained. Let that distinction rest for a moment. The difference between a slow leak and an open door. The dreamers chose to be a door, and a door can hold. Now consider what the infection would have looked like without any containment around its source. The radiance is not simply a plague. She is a being, a god by some measures, one of the old powers that existed before the Pale King reshaped the underground world. The Moth tribe worshipped her. She was the ancient light that had presided over the dreaming life of the kingdom's oldest inhabitants. When the Pale King came and brought his order of mines and roads and rational structures, the Moth tribe turned away from the radiance. They abandoned their ancient devotion and followed the Pale King's light instead. The radiance did not vanish when her worshippers turned away. She persisted. She persisted in dream, in the space between sleeping and waking, where her light could still move, where the memory of her could still press into minds that had once known her presence. The infection is what that persistence looks like when it grows beyond memory into compulsion. The orange light, the swollen eyes, the loss of self that turns a miner with a song into a husk with emotion, these are the radiance's presence forcing itself back into the world that tried to forget her. The Pale King understood that the radiance could not simply be destroyed, because she was a being of memory and dream and ancient presence, and those things do not die the way a body dies. He understood that she could be contained, if the container were hollow enough to hold her without giving her anything to press against, any crack of will or memory or attachment she could use to escape. He built his plan around that understanding, and it was a brilliant plan in its way, even if the flaw in it came from something the king could not fully prevent because he could not fully stop caring. But the radiance contained inside the hollow knight was not silent. She pressed against the vessel's imperfect walls. She worked through the bond that the king had inadvertently allowed to form. She worked through the dreaming membrane that was her natural habitat, and over time, slowly, she leaked back into the kingdom through the Hollow Knight's body. Now imagine that process without the outer barrier of the dreamer's sleep. Imagine the black egg with no masks on its door, or with only one or two insufficient to hold the design. The radiance's pressure through the Hollow Knight would not need to erode decades of triple-sealed resistance. It would reach outward into a world where the final barrier was already incomplete. The infection in this version of Hallownest moves faster, not because the vessel is any different. The vessel is the same imperfect container it always was, but the outer world has less protection, less time, less distance between the source of the plague and the lives it would eventually reach. The City of Tears would still have its reign, but the husks would come sooner. The Forgotten Crossroads would still have their passages, but the orange growth would spread through them before the architecture had finished being forgotten. The Crystal Peak would still have its miners, but the song would fade faster. Myla's voice would not last long enough to be heard. The seer in the resting grounds gave the dream nail and the means of gathering essence and the slow process of understanding what the radiance was and how to reach her in dream. All of that required time. The seer was the last of the moth tribe, the lineage that had once worshipped the radiance before the Pale King's order turned them away from her, and the seer carried the particular guilt and purpose of someone whose ancestors caused the forgetting that made everything worse. Her work in the resting grounds, her patient waiting for a being capable of carrying the dream nail through the kingdom's dreaming spaces, her rituals around the gathering of essence from the world's sleeping memories, all of that required the kingdom to persist long enough for those rituals to be available to a knight who descended at the right time. In a world where the seals were never properly established, the infection would not wait patiently for a small vessel to assemble the dream nail and learn what it could do. It would not give the kingdom decades in which a wandering cartographer could still hum over his maps, and a few mantises in a deep village could still resist the orange light through sheer discipline. It would spread into a world that had no temporary containment, no 3 locked door holding the source in check, no borrowed time. The Mantis tribe's resistance to the infection is one of the clearest signs that some parts of the kingdom could survive with enough discipline and pride to hold their minds against the plague. But the Mantis tribe's resistance is the resistance of a people with strong traditions and fierce internal law. It is impressive precisely because it was maintained without the help of royal planning. It would not be enough to protect the rest of the kingdom if the kingdom had no other defence. The hive's isolation is another form of resistance. The golden walls, the sealed society, the queen's influence maintained as long as Vesper lived. These gave the hive a kind of protection against the infection that came from separation rather than confrontation. But isolation cannot protect a world, only a corner of it. And a world in which the infection spread faster, with no outer barrier around its source, would eventually press even into golden walls. This is the shape of Hallownest, without the dreamer's sleep. Not a simple darkness, not an immediate catastrophe, but a world where the borrowed time was never borrowed, where the margin between the infection source and the people still living was never purchased, where everything that still stood when the night descended would have already fallen. Let the crossroads be quiet for a moment. Let the orange light be distant. Let the temple's door be sealed by 3 minds choosing sleep, and let that choice be the margin the world kept. There is another part of this question that is worth moving through carefully, and it concerns what the Pale King might have tried if the 3 dreamers had not agreed. The plan required 3. Without 3 willing beings of sufficient power and depth, the seal would be incomplete. The Pale King could not, as far as the world shows us, simply select anyone to become a dreamer. The dreamers were not ordinary citizens pressed into a role by royal command. They were beings with significant power and presence, each one capable of sustaining a dreaming seal that would hold for an extended period. Monoman was the teacher, a figure of immense archived knowledge and preserved essence. Lurien was the watcher, a noble of the city with a depth of devotion to his domain. Hurrah was the beast, the queen of an entire dark kingdom. If any or all of them refused, the Pale King would have needed to find alternatives. And the world Hollow Knight describes does not offer an obvious list of equally powerful candidates who might have been willing to make the same commitment. The 5 great knights were formidable, but the dreamers were chosen for their depth of presence, not only their martial ability. Ogrim, still loyal in the royal waterways, might have agreed, but Ogrim's power was the power of a devoted soldier, not the kind of preserved essence that Monomon or Hera carried. Zima, the Grey Mourner, was a knight, not a queen or an archivist. The others were scattered, diminished, gone. The Pale King might have attempted more vessel experimentation. He might have believed that the flaw in the Hollow Knight was a flaw in the selection process, rather than in the concept of hollowness itself, and he might have tried to find a vessel more perfectly empty. This would have meant more children in the abyss, more masks on the floor of that deepest place, more of what the word vessel truly cost, and it would not have solved the problem that the seal required 3 minds of a specific kind, not simply a more hollow container. He might have sought a confrontation with the Radiance in her own domain, in the dream space where she persisted. But the means to reach her there, the dream nail, and the understanding of how to bring void against dream light, required exactly the kind of time and preparation that the dreamer's sleep had made possible. A direct confrontation without the borrowed time, without the slow process of learning and dream nailing and breaking seals and descending into the abyss to reclaim what the void could unite, would be a confrontation without the tools that made it possible to win. The White Lady might have played a different role. She was one of the royal pair, ancient enough and powerful enough that her involvement in a direct confrontation with the Radiance might have changed the shape of the problem. But the White Lady had already limited herself severely, binding herself among the roots of Queen's Gardens, because her presence unconstrained was more than the world around her could comfortably hold. She could not be the seal, she could not be the confrontation. She could give 1/2 of Kingsoul and speak gently and mourn, but she could not substitute for 3 sleeping minds. The honest answer to what the Pale King might have tried is that the dreamer plan was his best answer to a problem that had no clean solutions. The radiance could not be killed in the ordinary sense. The hollow night could not be made perfectly hollow. The dreamers could not be replaced by lesser candidates. The plan was the best arrangement of imperfect options that the most foresighted king of the underground world could devise, and it still failed, only slowly enough to matter. A world without the dreamer's sleep is a world where the best of those imperfect options was not taken, and whatever came after it would have been worse. Hold that understanding gently. It is not comforting in a straightforward way, but there is something to rest in knowing that the three dreamers saw the problem clearly enough to name the shape of the best available answer, even if none of them could have called it a good answer, only the least terrible one. Now let us move to something smaller and more human, if that word can still reach down into the kingdom of Hellenist. The three dreamers did not make the same choice. They each made a version of the same commitment, but the nature of that commitment was different for each, and those differences matter not just as law details, but as reminders that even the most cosmic arrangements in this world were made by beings with their own specific ways of existing in it. Monoman calculated. She was a teacher and a keeper of knowledge, and when the plan was presented to her, she assessed it the way she would have assessed any problem brought to the archives. She looked for what she could preserve and what she had to give up, and how to make the giving up serve more than one purpose. She preserved the archives. She preserved Quirrell in the sense of entrusting him with the mask that would make his return meaningful rather than accidental. She went to sleep understanding that the knowledge she had spent her life accumulating would still be there in the water and glass, even if she could not wake to add to it. That calculation was its own kind of love, even if love is not the first word you reach for when describing an archivist in Fog Canyon. A being who cares about knowledge enough to sacrifice waking life to protect the arrangement that knowledge is part of, that is a particular kind of devotion. Not warm in the way Ogrim's loyalty is warm, not fierce in the way Hornet's guardianship is fierce, careful, precise, trusting the long view over the immediate comfort. And within that precision, an act of generosity that only a teacher would think to make, she did not preserve knowledge only in glass and water. She preserved the path back to it, in a wanderer who would find his way without knowing why finding his way was the right thing to do. That is what the best teaching does. It does not hand the student the answer. It arranges the world so that the student can arrive at the answer through their own particular journey. Monoman sent Quirrell away carrying a purpose he could not yet read, and trusted the shape of the world to bring him to the moment when reading it would become possible. The teacher's faith was not in the plan's perfection. It was in the wanderer's nature. Lurien devoted himself. He was a watcher, and what he watched he loved, and what he loved he was willing to keep intact at the cost of the one thing that defined him, his wakefulness. A watcher who cannot watch has given up the entirety of his identity. Lurien chose to give that up, not because the watching no longer mattered to him, but because the thing he was watching mattered more than the watching itself. He did not sleep to escape the sight of the kingdom's decay. He slept so that the decay would be held back long enough for something to still be worth watching, even if he could not be the one to see it. That is a kind of courage that is different from the courage of battle or the courage of confrontation. It is the courage of the person who loves a place so completely that they will stop being themselves if that is what it takes to protect it. Lurian's devotion was not loud. It was not a pronouncement made in a public space. It was a decision made in a high tower above a rain-filled city, and the city kept raining after he closed his eyes, and the rain did not know, but the door in the forgotten crossroads did. Hurrah bargained. She was a queen of a dark place that had always dealt with the rest of the world through negotiation rather than integration. Deepnest's relationship with Hallownest was never one of love or loyalty. It was coexistence under pressure, proximity without warmth. Hera's agreement to become a dreamer was not sentimental. She did not agree because she loved the Pale King or believed in his kingdom's inherent worth. She agreed because she wanted something that only the Pale King could provide, and because the price of getting it was one she was willing to pay. The child was the condition. The child was real. The child grew up and became someone fierce and competent and lonely, and exactly as complicated as you would expect a person to be whose existence was the terms of their own mother's eternal sleep. Hornet carries the weight of her origin not in a visible or dramatic way, but in the quiet and persistent way of someone who has never had a simple answer to the question of where she came from. She is the daughter of Adil. She is the living proof that the Beast of Deepness agreed. She is the reason the third seal existed, and the reason the third seal was different from the first two. There is something in that difference that is worth holding for a moment before we let it settle. The dreamers were not friends, not in any obvious sense. Monoman was an archivist in a canyon of fog. Lurian was a noble in a tower above a city of rain. Hurrah was a queen in the deepest and darkest part of a kingdom that had no fondness for the kingdom around it. They did not share a social world. They did not, as far as the law confirms, gather together in the same room and decide as a council to make this sacrifice in community. They each made their arrangement with the Pale King separately, for their own reasons, in their own terms, in their own language of calculation or devotion or bargain. They were strangers who happened to agree to the same act, and that act, performed by three strangers who had nothing in common except that each of them had something they cared about more than their own continued wakefulness, became the thing that held the kingdom together for long enough. There is something worth noticing in that. The arrangement that saved the world was not made by allies. It was made by three very different beings who happened to each be the right kind of person for a specific piece of what the problem required. That is not cooperation in the usual sense. It is something more like coincidence elevated by individual greatness into something that worked. Three different reasons for the same sleep. Three different kinds of beings choosing, or calculating, or bargaining their way into a permanent dreaming state that held the world together. None of them the same, all of them necessary. Each one a different angle of approach to the same impossible problem, which is what problems are when the people trying to solve them are genuinely different from each other, not interchangeable units making identical decisions, but particular minds with particular histories making the only choice available to them from inside their own particular lives. This is one of the reasons the Dreamer system is so quietly elegant as a piece of world building. It required 3, not 2, not 4, 3, each one different, each one adding something to the seal that the other 2 could not have provided alone. Monomon's deep knowledge, her capacity to preserve something of herself without sacrificing everything, the way she trusted forward into a future she could not see through Quirrell's carrying. Lurien's devotion, his willingness to give up the thing that defined him, because the thing he watched mattered more. Hera's pragmatism, her refusal to be sentimental about sacrifice while still making a sacrifice that was enormous. The creation and surrender of her own presence in a dark kingdom that had needed its queen. The three together formed something no one of them could form alone. That is how trust between very different people sometimes works. The calculation, the devotion, and the bargain, when they agreed to the same act for different reasons, became something larger than any of their individual motivations. The seal held. Let the three masks rest on the door for a moment. One mind in water and glass in a canyon of fog. One mind in a tower above a rain-filled city. One mind in the dark of a kingdom that was never fully mapped. Three different places. Three different kinds of sleep. One door held shut. There are certain things that the hypothetical cannot reach, and it is worth naming them clearly before we move toward rest. We cannot know for certain that the Pale King had no other options at all. The kingdom's history is told through fragments, through journal entries and lore tablets and scattered dialogue, and the architecture of places that remember their purpose even after their inhabitants are gone. There may be paths the Pale King considered and rejected that we cannot see. There may be powers within Hallownest that could have contributed to a different kind of containment. Hollow Knight's world is rich with unknown corners, and the correct posture toward those unknowns is not to fill them with certainty. What we can say is that the dreamer's sleep was the arrangement the world chose, and that the world as it exists, with its ruined capital and its surviving mantis village and its last stag and its wandering cartographer and its small silent knight, is the world that was produced by that arrangement. It was not a world that was saved, it was a world that was given time. And time is not the same as salvation, but it is not nothing. The night that descended through the well in Dirtmouth descended into a world that still had the shape of something that had once been preserved. The crossroads still had roads, the city still had towers, the resting grounds still had a seer, the fog canyon still had archives. All of these things persisted because three minds agreed to sleep, and because that sleep held a door shut around the worst of what was pressing to get out. The kingdom had received time for exactly long enough. That timing is worth sitting with in the quiet, because it is one of the most genuinely astonishing things about the Hollow Knight's world. The seal was failing. The dreamer's sleep did not prevent the infection from returning. The Hollow Knight was not hollow enough. The radiance was pressing outward through the vessel's imperfect walls, and yet the timing was close enough that a small silent knight could find its way to the temple, could gather what it needed, could reach the point of confrontation at the right moment. Coincidence is not the word for this, because Hallownest does not feel like a world in which coincidence is the operating principle. It feels like a world in which everything costs something, and the cost is paid by specific beings in specific acts, and the result is not perfect salvation, but imperfect time, in which the one who comes after can do what the ones before could not. The dreamers gave the night the world, not a healed world, not a restored world, not a world in which the thing at the centre could be approached without grief and sacrifice, and a descent into the deepest possible dark, but a world that was still there to descend into. That is what the three sleeping minds held. Not a solution, a world. Now the question can begin to soften. The hypothetical has been turned gently enough. The masks on the door have told their story. The three separate sleeping places have given up their meaning. And somewhere in the fog canyon, in the tower above the rain, in the dark of Deep Nest, three minds that chose and calculated and bargained their way into an eternal dream rest in the form they chose for themselves. There is a sleep thematic within this story that is worth noticing before we let the kingdom grow quiet. Sleep in Hollow Knight is rarely ordinary. Monoman does not sleep in the way you rest at the end of a long day. Lurien does not close his eyes and wake refreshed. Hera does not dream the ordinary dreams of a being who has put in an honest night of rest. Their sleep is permanent, purposeful and chosen, a form of existence that gives up the ordinary rhythms of waking and sleeping in favour of a sustained dreaming that holds something specific in place. And yet there is something recognisable in what they did. The idea of someone holding still so that the world around them can be protected. Of choosing a kind of suspended existence so that a larger arrangement can persist. Of giving up activity for the sake of what the stillness makes possible. These are not ideas that feel foreign to the experience of rest. Sleep, even the ordinary kind, even the kind you are moving toward right now, is a choice to stop moving, to release the day's demands, to let the body hold its place in the dark while the world goes on without your management of it. The dreamers chose an extreme version of that, and what they made possible by that choice was a world that could still be entered, still be explored, still be understood, still be grieved, still be carried through to whatever ending was most honest for it. Their stillness gave the world time, their sleep gave the kingdom shape. You do not need to give up anything tonight to sleep. No seal requires your dreams, no door needs your mind to hold it shut. The world will manage without the specific weight of your consciousness for a few hours, and it will still be there when you return to it. That is the ordinary mercy of ordinary sleep, and it is not as dramatic as the dreamer's sacrifice, but it is real, and it matters, and it is what is available to you right now. Let the kingdom begin to quiet. Let the question that brought us here tonight settle into the dark where questions rest. The teacher is in her archive, and the fog is still around it, and the water holds the old knowledge safe. The watcher is in his tower, and the rain is still falling through the city below him, and the streets remember what they used to carry even now. The beast is in her dark, and Deepness is still and threaded and old, and the child she bargained for is somewhere in the kingdom, moving with purpose she chose rather than was assigned. The Black Egg Temple sits in the forgotten crossroads, with its three masks intact, and the door holds, and the thing inside the door suffers in the way that only something asked to be empty, and unable to be truly empty, can suffer. And all of that is very far away from the room where you are. The hollow night is not calling you tonight. The radiance is not pressing against any seal you hold. The infection is distant, and orange and ancient, and far below any ground you are lying on. The three masks are on the door. The three minds are sleeping. The door is sealed. Let the dreamers sleep tonight. They have been sleeping long enough to know how. Their sleep is the form of rest that asks everything of the sleeper and gives the world back a chance. Yours is smaller and simpler and asks only that you close your eyes and let the day recede and trust that what matters will still be there when you wake. Let us move slowly through the kingdom now, room by room, passage by passage, letting each place settle into the particular quiet it was always meant to hold. The forgotten crossroads are quiet. The husks have settled into their old paths, rocking gently in place as they always do, without urgency, without destination. The small signs point toward roads that no one is walking tonight. The temple sits in its usual silence, heavy and sealed, and doing its work in the dark, without needing anyone to witness it. The passages that connect the crossroads to the rest of the kingdom are empty and shadowed and patient. They have held their shape through the long years of the kingdom's ruin. They will hold it through tonight as well. The roads the Pale King ordered built through the crossroads still show their original intention in the smoothness of the stone, in the way the paths connect with purpose rather than accident. They were built for movement. They hold the memory of movement even when no one is moving through them. That memory is not sad exactly. It is more like the presence of something that was good, preserved in the shape of the thing that expressed it. Fog Canyon breathes with its own slow rhythm, the acid still and the lumaflies dim and the archives settled in their water and glass. The teacher is in there, dreaming her seal, holding the mask's portion of the door, and the knowledge she preserved is still preserved, even if no one is walking through it tonight with curious eyes. The books and specimens and records are where she left them. The water that surrounds them is perfectly still. Outside, the creatures that live in the canyon drift with the same unhurried quality that everything in Fog Canyon has always had. The jellyfish-like beings pulse slowly through the air. The fog itself settles through the canyon in soft layers, catching the faint light from the luminescent life and diffusing it into something gentle. The canyon has always felt like a place that exists slightly outside the rules of the rest of the kingdom, and tonight that feeling is not strange. Tonight it is appropriate. Quirrell is at the Blue Lake. Or he has been. The still water up at the top of the world reflects whatever light reaches it, and the shore is quiet, and he sat there for a while, in the peace of someone who completed something, without having known exactly what they were completing. Whether he is still there, or whether the water took him in some gentler sense than words usually mean, the image of him at the shore remains. It is a small ending in a story full of endings that are too large to look at directly. It belongs to the gentler category. The crystal peak is quiet too. The crystal faces catch what little light exists in the tunnels and scatter it into soft prismatic patterns across the walls. Hallownest's crystals were always beautiful even in their original purpose. The raw mineral wealth of the peak that drew workers up through the underground and into its glittering passages. The beauty was there before the tragedy, and it persists after it. The light does not care about the circumstances. It refracts the way it always did. The peak holds the shape of what it heard once. It holds the memory of a song sung by someone who loved it there. The Watcher's spire stands above the City of Tears, and the rain falls through the capital below it without sound now, or with a sound so familiar it has become the same as silence. Lurien is in his tower, and the city is his to watch even if his eyes are closed, because the watching was always less about seeing than about caring, and caring does not require wakefulness. The rain falls on the empty towers and the empty streets, and the fountain that still drips in the centre of the ruined civic space. It falls on the pleasure house that has been silent for so long. It falls on the King Station where no stag waits and no traveller arrives. It falls on all of it with the same patient completeness that it always had, and Lurien's tower stands above all of it, and that arrangement is as it should be. The resting grounds hold their graves with the particular tenderness that the entire area has always carried. The seer rests with whatever rest belongs to someone who has been waiting for a very long time, and whose waiting has finally been answered. The dreamers and the mourners who left their monuments here are still. The epitaphs hold their words without anyone to read them tonight. The spirit of cloth is not there, having gone somewhere else, somewhere further, having spent the last of herself on something that mattered, the way she always hoped she would. The spirit of Traitor Lord's daughter has her corner. The grounds hold each of them with the same impartial tenderness. The grounds are not a sad place, not exactly. They are a place that has taken the weight of grief and found a way to hold it without collapsing under it. That is a rare and valuable quality. The grounds will still be holding it when morning comes. Kingdom's Edge is quiet at the edge of the world. The wind that moves through there, the particular wind of a place that borders on the emptiness beyond the kingdom, is gentle tonight. The Colosseum stands above the rest of the edge, its arena quiet, its corridors holding only the memory of what they hosted. Oro is somewhere out there, probably still sitting with his particular kind of solitude, the brooding patience of a warrior who has decided that waiting is what remains when everything else has been resolved. The edge has a quality of finality to it that is not threatening when you are resting. When you are resting, finality is just another word for boundary, for the place where one thing stops and the next thing is not yet required of you. The wind continues, because wind at the edge of a kingdom has nowhere particular to be, and so it simply continues. The Queen's Gardens are still, or as still as a place can be, that was always full of living things growing and trailing and reaching. The White Lady rests among her roots. The garden creatures are where they tend to be when the hours are late and the light is low. The flowers that still bloom in the gardens bloom without any audience but themselves, which has always seemed right for the White Lady's place. She was always a private thing, a deep thing, a root thing that did not require witnesses to continue being what it was. The Mantis village is quiet in the deep dark of the territory below the fungal wastes. The three lords sit in their thrones with the stillness that belongs to beings who have spent a very long time holding a specific posture and have long since stopped being conscious of the effort involved. Their village is one of the few places in the kingdom where the infection was genuinely refused, where the pride and discipline of a people became a form of immunity, and that refusal persists through the night. The village holds its traditions in the dark. The traditions hold the village. The hive is sealed and golden and warm, or has been warm, and the warmth persists in the architecture even now, in the way the hexagonal passages were shaped for comfort, and the way the colours of the hive's walls catch and hold the light differently from any other material in the kingdom. Vesper's presence was the hive's centre, and what happens to a centre when it is gone the hive answers in its own way. But the walls are still golden. The architecture still belongs to a people who made their home with the specific intelligence of those who understood what a home was for. The royal waterways run their water through the deep channels below the city, flowing with purpose even when no one is directing them. The water has its own agenda and its own schedule, and it follows both without needing the kingdom to be functioning around it. Ogrim keeps whatever rest is available to him in the places he tends, the most devoted of the great knights still present in a kingdom that has no more use for a knight's devotion in the practical sense, but who does not know how to be anything other than present and faithful. His fidelity is one of the things about Hallownest that is too sincere to be sad. It is simply what it is, the being whose nature is loyalty, who is loyal, in the dark, without audience, because that is what his nature requires. The ancient basin is very still. The basin predates much of what was built on top of it and around it. It holds the deep architecture of a kingdom beneath the kingdom, the foundations beneath the foundations. The lift that leads down toward the abyss hangs in its shaft with patient gravity. The white palace that existed above the basin, that the knight can find in the memory of a dream at the end of a great and terrible test, is somewhere in that memory still, white and precise and built with the particular ambition of a being who believed that order could be made permanent if the structure were beautiful enough. It was not permanent, but it was beautiful. And the memory of beauty does not need the thing to persist in order to persist itself. The abyss below is the stillest place of all. The void is not a moving thing, not usually. It is a being thing, a depth thing, a quality of the underground that exists without needing to perform its existence. The lighthouse at its edge sends its signal down into the dark with the patience of something built to keep going long after the one who built it stopped watching. The floor where the siblings lie is quiet. Theirs is a deep rest without scheduled end, and the void they were made of is still present around them, and the abyss holds all of that with a silence that is not empty but full of the ancient and the dark and the deep, which are not bad things to rest among. And you can be still too. You have wandered through the question tonight. You have moved through the archives and the spire and the deepness dark and the temple sealed door. You have held the weight of what the dreamers chose and what that choice made possible. You have felt the shape of a world that was given time instead of healing, and how time, imperfect and borrowed and slowly eroding, was enough for what needed to happen. You do not need to hold any of that now. You can set down the question. It will be there in the morning if you want it. The law is patient. Hallownest has been sitting still for a long time, and it is not going anywhere. Dirtmouth is still above the well. The few who remain there have settled for the night. Iselda has closed the map shop, and whatever quiet she holds in the absence of Cornifer is a quiet she has long since learned to live inside without being diminished by it. Elderbug is wherever Elderbug sits when the last of the evening is past, and there is no longer even the pretence of activity to observe from the well's edge. Zoti is somewhere in the dark being Zoti, which is its own unbroken continuity. Grim and his troop have moved on to wherever the troop moves, following their own ancient arrangement that has nothing to do with Hellenist's collapse, and everything to do with something older and more specific than any one kingdom's grief. Dirtmouth sits above the well in the dark above the kingdom, and the wind moves through its 3 or 4 structures, with the ease of wind that has never been blocked by anything very substantial, and the well is still, and the kingdom below the well is still, and all of it is doing exactly what it is doing, without requiring you to witness it or manage it or worry about it tonight. The 3 masks are on the door, the 3 minds are sleeping, the door is sealed, and that is enough for tonight. Let the fog canyon settle. Let the watcher's rain fall soft and distant. Let the deepness dark hold its quiet. Let the Black Egg Temple sit in the crossroads with its sealed door and its 3 masks and its ancient arrangement intact. Let the night rest on a bench somewhere in the dark, and let the nail be still beside it. Let the map fold closed. Let the stag bells hang without ringing. Let the lanterns be low in every corner of the kingdom you have just walked through. Let the teacher keep her knowledge. Let the watcher keep his vigil. Let the beast keep her bargain. Let the 3 sleeping minds hold the 1 locked door, and let yourself drift. Not into anything asked of you, not into anything sealed or sacrificed or bargained into existence, only into the ordinary rest that is yours tonight. The question has been asked. The answer is 3 sleeping minds in 3 different rooms in a kingdom that needed time. And time is what they gave. And what you have tonight is simple and whole and enough. Sleep well wherever you are listening from. Good night.